She was an American jazz singer, sometimes referred to as the First Lady of Song, Queen of Jazz, and Lady Ella. She was noted for her purity of tone, impeccable diction, phrasing, timing, intonation, and a horn like improvisational ability, particularly in her scant singing. I'm Tyrone Bowman. This is Tyrone Bowman Tonight. It's March and it's called International Women's Month. So, for the rest of March, I'm going to be talking about notable women of prominence and ordinary women who have made a difference in song, politics, activism, medicine, etc. Tonight in profile, the one and only Ella Fitzgerald. So let's get right down to her story on tonight. Who was she? Ella Jane Fitzgerald, according to Wikipedia, was born April 25th, 1917, and she passed away sadly on June 15th, 1996. As already stated, she was an American jazz singer, sometimes referred to as the First Lady of Song, Queen of Jazz, and Lady Ella. She was noted for her purity of tone, impeccable diction, phrasing, timing, intonation, and a horn-like improvisational ability, particularly in her scant singing. You know, a lot of people wish they could scant today, but they cannot do it the way that Ella did. Oh, they would love to, but they just can't do it. I don't mean to be laughing, but it's good to know that Ella Fitzgerald graced this planet at one time, and she is sadly missed. And along the way, someone is going to come along, and they're going to pay tribute to the one and only Ella Fitzgerald. So let's get down to Ella Fitzgerald's story. After a tumultuous adolescence, Fitzgerald found stability in musical success with the Chick Webb Orchestra, performing across the country but most often associated with the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem. Her rendition of the nursery rhyme, a tasket, helped boost both her and Webb to national fame. After taking over the band, and when Webb died, Fitzgerald left it behind in 1942 to start her solo career. Her manager was Mo Galley, co-founder of the Savoy, until she turned the rest of her career over to Norman Granz, who founded Verve Records to produce new records by Fitzgerald. With Verve, she recorded some of her more widely noted works, particularly her interpretations of the Great American Songbook. While Fitzgerald appeared in films and as a guest on popular television shows in the second half of the 20th century, her musical collaborations with Louis Armstrong Satchmo, Duke Ellington, and the Ink Spots were some of her most notable acts outside of her solo career. These partnerships produced some of her best-known songs, such as Dream a Little Dream of Me, Cheek to Cheek, Into Each Life Some Rain Must Fall, and It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing. In 1993, after a career of nearly 60 years, she gave her last public performance. 3 years later, she died at age 79. After years of declining health, her accolades included 14 Grammy Awards, the National Medal of Arts, the NAACP Inaugural President's Award, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Fitzgerald was born on April 25, 1917, in Newport News, Virginia. She was the daughter of William Fitzgerald and Temperance, or Tempe Henry, both described as mulatto. In the 1920 census, her parents were unmarried but lived together in the East End section of Newport News for at least 2.5 years after she was born. In the early 1920s, Fitzgerald's mother and her new partner, a Portuguese immigrant named Joseph de Sava, moved to New York in Westchester County, New York. Her half-sister, Frances de Sava, whom she stayed close to for all of her life, was born in 1923. By 1925, Fitzgerald and her family had moved to nearby School Street, a poor Italian area. She began her formal education at the age of 6 and was an outstanding student, moving through a variety of schools before attending Benjamin Franklin Junior High in 1929. Starting in third grade, Fitzgerald loved dancing and admired Earl Snake Hips Tucker. She performed for her peers on the way to school and at lunchtime. She and her family were Methodists and were active in the Bethany African Methodist Episcopal Church, where she attended worship service, Bible study, and Sunday school. The church provided Fitzgerald with her earliest experiences in music. Fitzgerald listened to jazz recordings by Louis Armstrong, Bing Crosby, and the Boswell sisters. She loved the Boswell sisters, a lead singer, Connie Boswell, later singing, "My mother brought home one of her records, and I fell in love with it. I tried so hard to sound just like her." In 1932, when Fitzgerald was 15 years old, her mother died from injuries sustained in a car accident. Her stepfather took care of her until April 1933, when she moved to Harlem to live with her aunt. This seemingly swift change in her circumstances, reinforced by what Fitzgerald's biographer Stuart Nicholson describes as rumors of ill treatment by her stepfather, leaves him to speculate that De Salva might have abused her. Fitzgerald began skipping school and her grades suffered. She worked as a lookout at a bordello and with a mafia-affiliated numbers writer. She never talked publicly about this time in her life. When the authorities caught up with her, she was placed in the Colorado Orphan Asylum in Riverdale in the Bronx. When the orphanage proved too crowded, she was moved, to the New York Training School for Girls, a state reformatory school in Hudson, New York. While she seems to have survived during 1933 and 1934, in part by singing on the streets of Harlem, Fitzgerald made her most important debut at the age of 17 on November 21, 1934, in one of the earliest amateur nights at the Apollo Theater. She had intended to go on stage and dance, but she was intimidated by a local dance duo called the Edwards Sisters and opted to sing instead. Performing in the style of Connie Boswell, she sang "Judy and the Object of My Affection" and won first prize. She won the chance to perform at the Apollo for a week, but seemingly because of her disheveled appearance, the theater never gave her the part of her prize. In January 1935, Fitzgerald won the chance to perform for a week with the Tiny Bradshaw Band at the Harlem Opera House. Later that year, she was introduced to her drummer and band leader Chuck Webb by Benny Carter, or Buck Ram, who had heard from singer Charlie Linton that Webb wanted to add a female singer, although reluctant to sign her because she was gawky and unkempt, a diamond in the rough. Webb offered her the opportunity to test with his band at a dance at Yale University. Met with approval by both audiences and her fellow musicians, Fitzgerald was asked to join Webb's orchestra and gained acclaim as part of the group's performance at Harlem's Savoy Ballroom. Fitzgerald recorded several hit songs, including "Love and Kisses" and "If You Can't Sing It, You'll Have to Wing It," Mr. Panani. But it was in her 1938 version of the nursery rhyme "A Tisket, a Tasket," a song she co-wrote, that brought her public acclaim. "A Tisket, a Tasket" became a major hit on the radio and was also one of the biggest selling records of the decades. Webb died of spinal tuberculosis on June 16, 1939, and his band was renamed Ella and Her Famous Orchestra, with Fitzgerald taking on the role of band leader. She recorded nearly 150 songs with Webb's orchestra between 1935 and 1942, in addition to her work with Webb. Fitzgerald performed and recorded with the Benny Goodman Orchestra. She had her own side project, too, known as Ella Fitzgerald and her Savoy 8. In 1942, with increasing dissent and money concerns in Fitzgerald's band, Ella and Her Famous Orchestra, she started to work as a lead singer with the Three Keys, and in July her band played their last concert at Earl Theater in Philadelphia. While working for Decca Records, she had hits with Bill Kenny and the Ink Spots, Louis Jordan, and the Delta Rhythm Boys. Producer Norma Grants became her manager in the mid 1940s after she began singing for jazz at the Philharmonic, a concert series begun by Grants. With the demise of the swing era and the decline of the great touring big bands, a major change in jazz music occurred. The advent of bebop led to new developments in Fitzgerald's vocal style. Influenced by her work with Dizzy Gillespie's big band, it was in this period that Fitzgerald started including scant singing as a major part of her performance repertoire. While singing with Gillespie, Fitzgerald recalled, "I just tried to do with my voice what I heard the horns in the band doing." Her 1945 scant recording of Flying Home arranged by Vic Shewan would later be described by the New York Times as one of the most influential vocal jazz records of the decade. Where other singers, most notably Louis Armstrong, had tried similar improvisation, no one before Miss Fitzgerald employed the technique with such dazzling inventiveness. Her bebop recording of "Old Lady Be Good," 1947, was similarly popular and increased her reputation as one of the leading jazz vocalists. Fitzgerald made her first tour of Australia in July 1954 for the Australian-based American promoter Lee Gordon. This was the first of Gordon's famous big show promotions, and the package tour also included Buddy Rich, Artie Shaw, and comedian Jerry Colonna. Although the tour was a big hit with audiences and set a new box office record for Australia, it was marred by an incident of racial discrimination that caused Fitzgerald to miss the first two concerts in Sydney, and Gordon had to arrange two later free concerts to compensate ticket holders. Although the four members of Fitzgerald's entourage, Fitzgerald, her pianist John Lewis, her assistant and cousin George Anna Henry, and manager Norman Gantz all had first-class tickets on their scheduled Pan American Airlines flight from Honolulu to Australia. They were ordered to leave the aircraft after they had already boarded and were refused permission to reboard the aircraft to retrieve their luggage and clothing. As a result, they were stranded in Honolulu for 3 days before they could get another flight to Sydney. Although a contemporary Australian press report quoted an Australian Pan Am spokesperson who denied that the incident was racially biased. Bull. Fitzgerald, Henry Lewis, and Grants filed a civil suit for racial discrimination against Pan Am in December 1954. And in a 1970 television interview, Fitzgerald confirmed that they had won the suit and received what she described as a nice settlement. Can you say ching, ching? Chocolata, baby. Fitzgerald was still performing at Grants' Jazz at the Philharmonic concerts by 1955. She left Decca and Grants. Now her manager created Verve Records around her. She later described the period as strategically crucial, saying, "I had gotten to the point where I was only singing bebop. I thought bebop was it, and that all I had to do was go someplace and sing bop. But it finally got to the point where I had no place to sing. I realized that there was more to music than bop. Norman felt that I should do other things, so he produced Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Cole Porter Songbook with me. It was a turning point in my life." On March 15, 1955, Ella Fitzgerald opened her initial engagement at the Mocabo nightclub in Hollywood. After Marilyn Monroe lobbied the owner for the booking was instrumental in Fitzgerald's career. Bonnie Greer dramatized the incident as the musical drama Marilyn and Ella in 2008. It had previously been widely reported that Fitzgerald was the first black performer to play the Mocabo following Monroe's intervention, but this is not true. African-American singers Herb Jeffries, Eartha Kitt, and Joyce Bryant all played the Mocabo in 1952 and 1953, according to stories published at the time in Jet magazine and Billboard. Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Cole Porter Songbook, released in 1956, was the first of 8 songbook sets. Fitzgerald would record for very at irregular intervals from 1956 to 1964. The composers and lyricists spotlighted on each set taken together represent the greatest part of the cultural canon known as the Great American Songbook. Her song selections ranged from standards to rarities and represented an attempt by Fitzgerald to cross over to a non-jazz audience. The sets are the most well-known items in her discography. To be continued. I'm Tyrone Bowman. Never surrender, never quit.